Just going to give you a little bit of bio on Michael to start off. He's a policy director for RENEW Wisconsin, a nonprofit organization founded in 1991 to promote renewable energy development and use in Wisconsin. Under Mr. Vickerman's direction from 91 to 2012, RENEW formulated and mobilized political, bear with me guys, political support for several major pro-renewable policies, including a statewide 10% renewable requirement by 2015, uniform siting and permitting standards for wind generators, and incentives for customer-sited renewable energy systems in the state's Focus on Energy program. As policy director, Vickerman advances the interests of renewable energy producers and purchasers in legislative and regulatory proceedings, as well as public forums. Through expert testimony, issue briefs, data gathering, presentations, and commentaries, Mr. Vickerman shapes and drives the narrative forward on renewable energy in Wisconsin. He received a BA degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in '78, majoring in history and art history. He's going to speak today about the large solar and wind outlook for Wisconsin. He will share the current landscape for large-scale zero-carbon power plants under development in Wisconsin and provide growth estimates for the next 5 to 10 years. In-state solar and regional wind energy development will receive special focus, along with utility commitments and actions to decarbonize their electric power resource mix. Welcome, Michael.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, yes.
Okay, all right. I appreciate having an audience here for this particular presentation. I made a few changes to it. It's largely based on a webinar we put together last in the third week of September, which was Clean Energy Week. But I mixed in a few slides from other presentations, including a couple from our Renewable Energy Summit back in January. We are having another Renewable Energy Summit this coming January. Of course, it'll be virtual, but the previous summit drew about 600 registrants, and it was quite a delightful and informative day that we spent together celebrating renewable energy and the people who are making it happen in the state. The contents have been adapted a little bit to take a broader look at where we stand with respect to solar, because that's really where it's at these days. All right. Oh, here we go. All right, whoops, sorry. I'm trying to, come on. I'm trying to remove this little box that popped up, damn, because it's kind of blocking my view of the slides. Anyway, let's get going. So, though it's well into 2020, the state is still trying to recover from the deep chill of the previous administration, which cared little for environmental protection and clean energy interests. The result was a policy vacuum on energy that lasted all the way into 2019. RENEW is hard at work trying to thaw the landscape and build momentum for the clean energy transition now getting underway. We'll be looking at both grid-connected and behind-the-meter renewable energy in Wisconsin. Solar power will dominate the content of this presentation. Solar power is emerging as the preeminent source of renewable electricity generated in state. The image you see on the right, that of the Two Creeks solar farm developed by NextEra Energy, will be the first large-scale solar farm in Wisconsin to be placed in service, hopefully later this year. That plant was approved by the Public Service Commission, which means it's a pretty big plant. 150 megawatts for those who keep track of these things. And I've listed on the left the specific sub areas that we will cover.
How many homes might that be equivalent to, Michael? That's 150 megawatts.
Good question. So a megawatt, several, I don't know how many thousands, I think over 10,000. Let me get back to you later in the presentation with the correct number. There's a simple formula. You would have to divide that by, say, 9 or 8,000 kilowatt hours a year, which is how much a typical home consumes in a year. So 150 million divided by 8,000 will get you that number. I just don't have it right with me.
Okay, great. And why don't we just, how about we hold the questions till the end? Because we'll
Okay.
have at least 10 minutes afterwards, after Mike's presentation, to ask questions, okay?
And I've got another suggestion. If everybody could put their system on mute.
And mute, yep.
Okay. So August 16th, 2019, it's the date of the photo taken on the right. That was a big day. You may recall that under former Governor Scott Walker, the state of Wisconsin's websites were scrubbed clean of any reference to climate change. With this executive order from Governor Evers, Wisconsin now has an energy policy which recognizes the ongoing climate change emergency and aims to scale back the state's over-reliance on fossil fuels. And you see some of the specific provisions enunciated in that order. All right, so what you have there is a table that lists the commitments from most of Wisconsin's electric providers regarding clean energy goals. So you have the 5 investor-owned utilities, Dairyland Power, which supplies rural electric associations, and WPPI Energy, which supplies more than half of the state's municipal electric utilities. So the targets appear in the middle column, and the column on the right actually shows where they are today in terms of renewable portfolio standard compliant renewable energy. And you can see there's a pretty broad range. Now, one thing to note about the state's clean energy goal, keep in mind that nuclear generation is considered a clean energy source. This is not commentary, this is just the way they're doing their calculations. So if you're a customer of Xcel Energy, I imagine some of you are, consider yourself fortunate. Even though you live in Wisconsin, your utility is an affiliate of a large company that is aggressively reducing its carbon emissions throughout its upper Midwest territory. And you can see that, and I'm just going to go back to the previous slide, already they're well ahead of the other utilities and suppliers in the state. And they're on a faster track, certainly, than their other Wisconsin peers. Now we are looking at a pie chart in the Public Service Commission's draft strategic energy assessment for this biennium. This is a planning process that looks out to all the way to 2026. That's what we have for planning here. Anyway, that pie chart reflects resource share of all the electricity generated in Wisconsin back in 2018. So if you add the renewable resource slices, which are pretty thin, with the nuclear slice, the share of non-CO2 producing generation to total generation comes to about 25%. So that means that, well, what accounts for the other 75% of the electric mix? Well, it's basically coal and natural gas, both of which are fossil fuels. All right, so to be able to track clean energy's growth, you need to know how much electricity is consumed in Wisconsin in a typical year, and how much electricity is produced by a megawatt of solar. For the solar power number, it's assumed that the installation uses single axis trackers. And in Dunn County, there's an example of a solar farm, a small solar farm that on single axis trackers. And I believe that farm is called Downsville, and it supplies electricity to Dairyland Power. I mean, if I were living in Dunn County right now and I had a little free time, I'd go over to that solar farm and see if the snow has cleared the panels. Because they're on single axis trackers, they can shed snow rather easily. At any rate, so so we were talking about that Two Creeks solar farm earlier. That produces a little bit over 300,000 megawatt hours. If my math is correct, so that Two Creeks solar farm actually produces close to 0.5% of the total electricity consumed in Wisconsin. And that project should be online by the end of the year. So that's certainly a useful benchmark for that project. Okay, so I've got two tables here and one pie chart up for your viewing pleasure. So there are three takeaways I want to provide to you. Regarding to the pie chart, more renewable electricity is imported from out of state than is generated in state. Most of the wind power serving Wisconsin utilities is actually generated in Iowa and a little bit in Minnesota and Illinois. There'll even be a South Dakota wind farm joining that fleet soon. The second thing regarding the table on the upper right, renewable energy supplies have remained largely constant since 2013, upper right table. The previous administration would consider that actually an achievement. On the lower right corner, that particular table, you can see there's a huge disparity among individual utilities in terms of supplying themselves with renewable generation. Clearly, as you go farther west in Wisconsin, the less CO2 content, there is less CO2 content in the resource mix. So these factors are relevant to any discussion about a clean energy future. It's clear that Western Wisconsin is moving faster towards decarbonization than Eastern Wisconsin. And then with this slide, I'm showing you the locations of the wind farms that either owned by Wisconsin electric utilities or are supplying power under contract to Wisconsin utilities. Though it's not unusual to have utilities sourcing their wind power from neighboring states, it is unusual to see a state sourcing more than half of its wind generation from facilities in other states. Now, it is true that the wind resource in Minnesota and Iowa is a little bit stronger than it is in Wisconsin. But that can be overcome with today's turbines. There are other reasons for the placement of the turbines in other states. So moving on. Our policy landscape here in the state is rather barren in terms of supporting a clean energy transition. We don't have a planning process like most of our neighboring states do. Our RPS effectively establishes a 10% floor, and the utilities are complying with that floor. State law does not prioritize in-state renewables, as we've already seen. However, there's one saving grace. While wind and solar are not subject to property taxes, the state's gross receipts tax distributes a portion of the dollars and back to local governments. So actually, there is a fairly nice, attractive flow of revenues that come from hosting large solar and large wind farms. And this makes Wisconsin attractive to national renewable energy developers like Invenergy, NextEra, and many others. So, So of the 35 megawatts of solar capacity installed in 2019, close to 1/2 occurred outside the utility's bloodstream, which means driven by customers. But if the state is to have any success in achieving its ambitious clean energy goals, the customer-driven segment will need to expand. It will take us into the next century to engineer a clean energy transition solely on the strength of customer investments. We're going to have to pump that segment up significantly, because the utilities are now starting to drive the solar train. It's important that customers have the opportunity to do the same. So there are bright spots here and there around the state. Some communities have adopted pretty serious plans for assessing and installing solar. One of them is in the Ashland Bayfield area, which is home to a very effective local renewable energy group called Check Bay Renewables. So they used with the strength of a DOE grant, Check Bay Renewables assessed the viability of solar power at various municipal operations, including wastewater treatment plants, and also schools in Bayfield County. So relative to total consumption and usage, there is a pretty significant amount of behind-the-meter solar generation in Ashland Bayfield area. And those two plants you see are in Bayfield County. Thanks to the philanthropy of a couple by the name of Cal and Lori Couillard. Cal Couillard developed a factory outside of Madison. He manufactured aluminum rollers for fast food preparation facilities, basically food processing plants. Did very well, sold his business, and with the proceeds of the sale of the business, he created a foundation, which is now providing funding for nonprofit entities that want to put solar on their rooftops or on their grounds. And Renew Wisconsin is proud, fortunate to be a partner of the Couillard Foundation. We developed a program for carrying out Cal's mission called Solar for Good. So Solar for Good provides a layer of financial support targeted to a market segment that values solar, but is often cash strapped and is unable to take advantage of federal tax credits. The main driver of solar generation in this country is, besides the fact that the technology is inexpensive, are tax credits. But they only are effective if you have a tax appetite. And governments and schools and other nonprofits don't have a tax appetite. So on the left there, you see a grant was provided to a community of tiny houses that serve homeless veterans. And on the right, a grant was provided to a retreat center outside of Madison, operated by Madison-based Bethel Lutheran Church. In Solar for Good's second year of operation, which was 2019, the program dispersed nearly $300,000 in grants, leveraging 27 working systems, totaling more than 1 megawatt of generating capacity. So more than 1 megawatt of generating capacity is about the same amount of solar that you see in the Downsville solar farm, south of Menominee. In 2019, PV systems were installed on a wide variety of nonprofit entities, including those serving faith communities, families of patients receiving extended care in hospitals, and animals. Okay, so let's talk about solar farms. We're pleased to welcome a new type of power plant. Those images you see are power plants. It has become a cost-effective source of emission-free electricity. The one depicted here on the right energized in 2018, generates power for Dairyland Power Cooperative and St. Croix Electric Cooperative. Solar farms package many economic, environmental, and health benefits that spread into the local community and out to the broader public. But it's a tribute to solar energy's increasingly favorable economics that the new wave of solar farms are 50 to 100 times as large as the Warren Array in St. Croix County. Where's the table? I guess I wonder why that table isn't showing up. Well, anyway, just sorry about that. So this table represents the second wave of solar farms working their way through the Public Service Commission. The first wave, which was depicted on the previous slide, amounted to about 700 megawatts of solar. So that was almost 5 times as much solar as we saw in that initial image of Two Creeks Solar Farm. So anyway, those have all been approved and are under construction. What you see here on this slide is the next wave going through the Public Service Commission, and it's an even larger wave. And 3 of those facilities are going to be acquired by Alliant Energy, which has that's Wisconsin Power and Light. It has an application to acquire almost 700 megawatts of solar. All right, so let's do some math here. So we have the 700 megawatts already approved and now under construction, 950 megawatts under review, 2 more 100 megawatt solar farms that just filed their applications, several other solar farms that are being reviewed at the local government level. An example of that would be the Western Mustang Farm in Pierce County, which was recently approved by the land use committee there. And so we add up those numbers and we reach 2,118 megawatts. And remember that other number I showed at the beginning, 315 megawatts of solar is the equivalent of 1% of Wisconsin's electricity sales. So we're looking at somewhere between 6.5% and 7% of Wisconsin's electricity sales taken up by projects already moving through the permitting pipeline. That's pretty impressive. So I'll let you read this question real quick since I can't see it. And so it's clear that in the absence of any kind of policy driver, it's really raw economics that is propelling the solar industry forward, particularly at the large scale utility level. That is to say, the utilities have concluded that in terms of adding to their generating capacity and replacing their older generating units, nothing really beats solar power. That's just absolutely remarkable that we've gotten to that point. Even 5 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. Back in 2015, we were still negotiating with utilities to offer up the kind of array you see in the Warren Array or the Downsville Array, some of the other arrays supplying Dairyland power. And now they are just coming in fast and furious. So why are the utilities investing in solar power? It's a combination of cost effectiveness. They can find willing landowners who are eager to host the arrays. They're easy to permit. The tax policy is favorable, both land taxes and income taxes. And last, and this is sometimes overlooked, the customers support this sort of thing. And in some cases, utilities are actually building solar farms for individual customers. We'll get into that. So that's why Alliant is planning to plow close to $1 billion in the next generation, the next phase of its generating fleet, which is all solar. All right. So let's take a look at customer-driven solar here. And what you see there is a new, I'm sorry. I don't know why these slides moved around, so sorry about this. But anyway, that array you see there is not supplying the general rate base of Madison Gas and Electric. It's supplying two specific customers, a school district and the city of Middleton. And the rest of the array is supplying their community solar subscribers. Customers made that array happen, not policies at all. So that's something to appreciate here. So here's a table where 5 solar arrays are listed. These are all customer-driven solar projects that MGE is building. They constitute more than 40 megawatts. They're serving either self-selecting large customers or shared solar subscribers. These are not rate-based assets. Shared solar subscribers receive the output from off-site arrays at a fixed price that's slightly above standard energy rates. Both shared solar subscribers and renewable energy rider customers effectively pay their share of the entire project. These are projects that are not costing other ratepayers anything. MGE's success in building these off-site arrays and providing solar power directly to customers begs the question, why aren't all utilities doing this sort of thing? All right, so what we have here, we're going to spend a minute on community solar here. So Minnesota stands out as the nation's #1 success story with community solar. Now understand that there are many, many customers that cannot put solar on their roofs. Either they don't own the dwelling unit that they live in, or there is a problem with the roof, needs replacement soon, or there's a large tree in front. You add up all those reasons and it comes to about 4 out of every 5 residential households cannot host solar on their residence. So community solar steps up to connect those customers to new solar that they would like to have on their house, but for the physical conditions. Minnesota passed a law back in 2013 to encourage community solar, and the program has really taken off. And now there are more than 700 megawatts of solar capacity serving these particular customers, which is 2 orders of magnitude more than the 7 megawatts we have here, most of that in Madison Gas and Electric territory. So what does that mean? It means we need a statewide solar policy as soon as possible. This is a tried and true mechanism for expanding solar in a way that touches all potential customers, and we just don't have anything like that in our state. Most people don't know why farmers and rural landowners find solar so appealing. Renting land to a solar developer generates a return 5 to 6 times as high as planting corn and soybeans. Moreover, it is relatively easy to restore that land back to active cultivation, unlike urban sprawl, which permanently forecloses any return to agriculture or a more natural state. These solar farms are generally built for 30, 35 years of usage. And then they could either be repowered or returned to the previous land use. We have We at Renew put together a fact sheet that addresses a fear occasionally expressed that solar farming diminishes the traditional farm economy. And the images or the text you see on this slide come from that fact sheet. If anything, the reverse is true. Hosting solar arrays keeps farms in the family. So let's look at emissions. Between 2020 and 2026, there will be a more dramatic decline in CO2 emissions than what's indicated in this bar chart due to some recently announced coal plant retirements. And also Esme Alliance solar plants. That's still not a very significant decline. So I put together this slide here yesterday to highlight the contrast between a state that has a planning process, e.g. Minnesota, and a state that does not, Wisconsin. So Minnesota's utility planning process obliges electric providers to disclose projected retirements 20 years in the future. The top plant on the Minnesota side is Allen S. King, which is the closest coal plant to Dunn County. It's sitting in Washington County on the other side of the St. Croix River, but you know when it's going to stop producing power. So it would appear that Minnesota is set to close all of their coal plants before the year 2040. So unfortunately, there's no such requirement in Wisconsin. We only know just the fate of 2 coal-fired power plants because they're going to come offline within 2 years. And the remaining coal plants account for almost 5,000 megawatts of generating capacity. Understand as well that when a power plant is retired, the utilities stop recovering costs associated with them. Without retirement plans, Wisconsin ratepayers could be burdened by these plants for a long time. All right, so this slide just simply shows with the pluses and minuses which years are going to see a net addition of CO2 in the atmosphere from Wisconsin power plant sources, and which years will actually show a decline. And you can see that with 2020, we had a big gas-fired plant come online. But following that year, things should improve a little bit with the energizing of Two Creeks, Badger Hollow, basically about 1,500 to 2,000 megawatts of solar. So let me wrap up by saying that clearly large solar has become the default supply resource in Wisconsin. These arrays, the large arrays are located in rural areas. They provide much needed tax revenues to local governments, as well as a fresh injection of income for cash-strapped farmers and landowners. So emissions will decline for the next 4 or 5 years. This we're pretty confident of. Federal tax policy has a significant role to play here in how dramatic that decrease is. The tax credits for solar are decreasing. This year they're at 26%, next year 22%, and in 2022 they go down to 10%, which may have a braking effect on the solar marketplace, but these tax credits could be revisited by Congress. At any rate, again, as I said before, we never thought, even as late as 2015, 2016, that we would be seeing so much solar proposed in Wisconsin, and now under construction in 4 locations, and with a little more attention to the utility interconnection policies and their buyback rates, we could see a similar we could see similar strength exhibited by the customer segment, which is struggling, particularly businesses putting solar on the rooftops. It's harder for them. And we have a focus on energy program that's great for the solar marketplace, but in the end, we're only talking about $5 million in incentives per year. And if we want to expand solar for ordinary customers, we need to increase the annual budget of that worthy program. So I'm going to stop here. I want to thank you for listening to this. And so at this point, I'll hand the virtual mic over to all of you if you have any questions. And I will stop the share.
Don't forget to unmute if you have any questions. Do we have questions for Michael?
Well, I have a comment.
Okay.
Michael, when you mentioned, I think it was the Couillard grants.
Yes.
Well, that rang a bell with me, and I got out of my chair. I went looking through a stack of newspapers here, and but it was, and I have a tendency, I don't read the newspapers right away. I might read several days in a row. But I read recently, I would have guessed this was in the paper maybe in the last week, but here in our area, Eau Claire Memorial and Eau Claire North High Schools, each school is installing, and my numbers are just kind of from my memory, 360 solar panels in each of those schools. And I believe the money came from Couillard. And he is a graduate of Eau Claire Memorial High School. So he's a native of this part of Wisconsin.
Oh.
And so I may be wrong, but I wanted to get the paper and I was going to share it, but I don't know, I got a whole stack of papers here.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. So there's another program that the Couillard Foundation donates to. It's called Solar on Schools. And the two Eau Claire schools that you mentioned are going to receive pretty large pretty large installations. That'll cover more than 10% of their electric load. And yes, Cal Couillard is an Eau Claire native. He lives now in Dane County, but he was really, really motivated to help out the schools in his old stomping ground.
Yeah, I think the numbers, I think it was going to save like $20,000 a year on their electric bill. And I believe they lasted like 30 years, those panels. And they had the numbers, but the payback, it was pretty decent.
Yeah.
And, so it was I found it very interesting.
So, just one last thing. For the most part, the Couillard Foundation donates panels instead of grants. They're actually receiving panels from Cal's for-profit business. He's also gone into the solar panel distribution market, and he's pretty good at that. But yes, I'm glad we made that. I'm glad you found that story. I'd forgotten about that, but there is pretty strong tie between this philanthropist and the Eau Claire area.
And I think one of those schools, the end of October, I believe they're all going to come on power. So we're talking another week or two.
Yeah, have to clear the snow off.
So as far as the one in Downsville, could you send us how we could find that? I'd be curious to drive out there and take a look at it.
It's right off of County Road J, back by the church. What's that church?
Little
Little Elk Creek, yep, it's right back in that
I know
area.
where Little Elk Creek is, okay.
Yeah, it's back, I
Michael?
think it's on 370th Avenue. Trying to remember. Sorry, and Steve, I can give you the information later. Kathy, you had a question? And then
Yeah, I think
Lindsay, then Barb. Sorry,
Barb has one too.
and so does Lindsay, yep. So Kathy, go ahead.
Michael, I'm talking to a conservation-minded person, and they were concerned about the environmental impact of the materials that go into solar screens and what's going to happen with them afterwards. Do you have some comments about that?
Sure. Well, these panels are built to last 30 years. And even after 30 years, the reason why they might be removed from a solar farm is not because they're starting to dematerialize. It's because their rated capacity goes down. Their output goes down very slightly over time. So at a year 30, they're producing power at 85% of the potency that they would have produced in year 1. So those panels after 30 years actually have still a lot of usefulness to left. Now, so as far as chemicals leaking out of the panels, it's just not happening, period. I really do not know where that concern comes from. So, I mean,
Yeah, I know.
But there is attention now being paid to end of life uses for solar panels, which could either involve continued use, donations to other people could use them, or recycling. And so while the recycling hasn't become a full-time option yet, we're pretty confident that we'll find uses for those panels after they're taken off your roofs and the solar farms.
Michael, I have another question. If you take, let's say you have a solar panel in Arizona, which is closer to the equator and higher percentage of sun during the year, et cetera. And you have that same solar panel in Wisconsin. What would be the percentage, let's call it total output in a year of the Arizona application versus the Wisconsin application? Any idea on that?
Yeah, I'm thinking that the same solar panel would probably produce twice as much electricity over the course of a year. Actually, the Wisconsin panels would be remarkably productive in the winter during the few hours that the sun is shining, because they do better in colder temperatures than they do in hot temperatures. And there's less of a cleaning problem in Wisconsin for solar generation compared with Arizona, which can be dry and dusty. And so those particulates gather on the surface. But it's also important to remember that that electricity, no matter how it's generated, loses its potency the longer it travels over power lines. So in Wisconsin, it makes all the sense in the world to supply Wisconsin households and businesses with solar generated from within the state's borders.
Barb?
Could I ask a little more about that? I'm interested in the emphasis on large solar farms versus more distributed networks such as residential agency or community solar. As I talk to people here in Dunn County, I sense a wariness about large centralized energy, no matter whether it's renewable or not. On the other hand, when I hear from our Dunn Energy Board, I sense a hesitancy about distributed energy because I think they see it as competition as opposed to an additional source. I'm a huge supporter of solar. I own panels in the Downsville area, and I have also panels in my backyard, but I too am wary of large solar arrays. Much more interested in distributed energy, but there's like a gap between the suppliers, whether they're our Dunn Energy Cooperative, and the customers who are wary of large wind turbines or solar farms. What's the common ground?
The common ground is climate change. Individual households, businesses, schools, hosting solar panels will not result in the closure of a fossil fuel power plant. For the simple reason that it just takes too many of those installations to materialize into something that actually affects the flow of electricity over the grid. I mean, just think of, just start adding up, if you will. If households have 5 kilowatts of solar, if every household in Dunn County had 5 kilowatts of solar, how much power would that produce compared with that Two Creeks solar farm that you saw at the beginning of my presentation? Maybe 1/10 of that, perhaps not even that much. The distributed generation is extremely important for helping customers manage their own generation, their household energy expenses, and to do something to reduce their own individual carbon footprint. But it is really, it starts becoming highly speculative to think that so many people will put 5 kilowatt solar systems on their roofs that'll actually make a dent in what a utility is needs to supply its all of its customers within its territory. I refer to this as the tyranny of the 7 orders of magnitude. It takes 7 orders of magnitude distributed to equal basically a centralized power plant. Sorry, 6 orders of magnitude for one centralized power plant, 7 to account for close to half of the generation that's consumed in state. So we need both. So I mentioned climate change because it's only when the large power plants are actually taken offline that you actually see significant emissions reductions. And that is
Okay, we're gonna have to wrap this up. Do we have any more questions?
Lindsay,
I
I
do.
think had one.
Lindsay?
Okay, Lindsay?
Yeah. Okay. Hi. My nonprofit works in 20 counties, all the way up to Bayfield, down to Dunn. We're a land trust, and we're involved in resiliency, working and protecting biodiversity. I had the fortune to work in Minnesota for 5 years before coming to Wisconsin, Vermont, and Alaska. But my point is this. In Minnesota, my observation is that the environmental groups were able to all coalesce around each other to work collaboratively to move bigger initiatives forward, like a Legacy Act. And I've noticed in Wisconsin, and granted, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere, Northwest, there's a reluctancy to actually work more collaboratively together to actually move government. And I've noticed groups maybe in Madison work cooperatively, but I've noticed, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere and it's obvious. So I know as much as we like to throw Scott Walker and the government under the bus, and we should be, there is work we internally need to do, because climate is the biggest issue we're going to be facing. And you need to value the work I'm doing. I need to value the work you're doing, Michael. And more importantly, all of our organizational members should be engaged in these issues to push the board forward. And I can't for the life of me figure out what's the challenge here in Wisconsin. And then my second comment is I live in rural Otter Creek. I live around a lot of big farms. they are not interested in solar. It is a cultural thing. The same way they don't want to wear masks right now, Michael. So I also think we have to be honest with a lot of, I think there are progressive pockets in the state. Bayfield's progressive, Madison. But when you're in the non-progressive areas, how we message our progressive work has to be done in a different language. And I love your presentation. I love all you're doing. So, take this all with a little grain of salt, because I've been trying really hard how to reach these people, because they care about hunting and fishing, but they think climate is a joke. So we've got our work ahead of us, but I'd love to figure out how we could all work more cooperatively together. And that's the beauty of this Done Heat group, is trying to do this within a county framework. And I don't know, Michael, you've been doing this a long time, what your thoughts are, or maybe I'm just hot air out here. Sorry.
No, I think you're spot on. When we go out into when we leave Madison and Milwaukee and Eau Claire to do our advocacy work, we concentrate on the economics of renewable power. We try to make this as much a bread and butter issue as possible. Now, there's nothing we can do to allay the concerns of rural residents who might see in a solar farm something that'll take away their hunting, their ability to hunt on that land. There's nothing we can do about it, because solar is a somewhat land-intensive technology. Yes, even as it's restoring the earth underneath the arrays, these arrays are fenced off, and you can't go snowmobiling between the arrays. But I think your larger point is really quite accurate. Part of the problem we're dealing with is a vacuum of leadership that only started to turn around with the election of a new governor in 2018. We have a legislature that, I'll give you an example. We have an affiliated arm that can make endorsements and engage in lobbying at the legislature. We awarded several legislators on both sides of the aisle just a couple weeks ago. And we had a nice event providing the awards to the two Democratic recipients. We offered to create a public-facing event for the Republican legislators. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. They want us to slip the award under their door, and they pick it up. And they're thankful, but they don't want others to see that they're actually collaborating with a green group. And we're not strictly speaking an environmental organization. We're an independent hybrid that has a little bit of a trade association, there's a little bit of environmental organization, a little bit of an economic development agency, all kind of mixed together. And which makes us kind of unique that way. And we would love to work, build coalitions at the local level. We don't seem to have a problem doing that in Dane County or in Eau Claire County. But the rest of the state is more of a challenge, and we can do what we can in terms of messaging, but political leadership really would go a long way, and including political leadership at the county level.
Okay, wonderful.
I know that we're in time, but Michael,
Yeah.
what I'd like to do is follow up with you more about how we can collaborate and work on a county level. That would be great. If we could piggyback after this to find out, to tap your brain about how we can do that. That's part of what our group is all about, and I think an important takeaway.
Okay, happy
Great.
to do that. I welcome the opportunity to
Wonderful.
more directly with you guys.
Great. Thank you for the presentation. It was great. And we really appreciate it. We hope we can keep in touch. If anyone has questions, just make sure that they, let Michael know. And I think at this point, we're ready to move on.